Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Strange music show with that strange presenter talking about different albums each and every week, right? So today we're either returning to or introducing this strange cassette label, Venalism, with a look at a fascinating album I discovered within their, slew of different releases. And so, once again, as we often get with certain albums, there's very little information to go on when it comes to this one, especially when it comes to the artist involved. And so, we're kind of on our own once again, but to be honest, when has that ever really stopped us, I have to say though, this is easily one of my favourite record releases of this very year, one of my favourite releases from Venalism, so very excited to discuss this one with you today. Today, I present Lacrosse by Kate Finley. And so, of course, who is Kate Finley? Well, very sorry, no idea. So trying to search up information on Kate Finley comes up with absolutely nothing. Their Discog page only features the very album we're looking at today. And so, very little to go on. Kind of like what we get with certain records from Fault Records, right? It is what it is. What are we doing today? Well, we're looking at the album Lacrosse, released on Venalism in 2024 as its 31st official release. And this is a very strange album, a very strange experimental electronic album that's so weirdly fascinating with its blending of conventional electronic music with the more unconventional as well. Maybe. It's a rather fascinating, rather short album that navigates such a spectrum of electronic music in such a brilliant, effortless way, really combining many facets of different electronica genres into something that's oddly cohesive, but so cold and sterile at the same time. So on the Bandcamp liner notes, we do have one little bit of information though regarding this album and Kate Finley, and as is the only thing to go on, Lacrosse by New York's Kate Finley achieves a rare dichotomy by being simultaneously fragile and intimate, while also embodying an apparitional-like sparsity and ice-cold disconnection. Tracks are built on what feels like the most brittle of foundations, and then awkwardly and apprehensively evolve into something breathtakingly hypnotic and delicately skewed. Kate Finley's music is like an approximation of half-remembered dreams and hauntological recall, at times submerged and warm, other times sparse and borrowed. It requires the listener to truly focus on these eerie audio snapshots in an attempt to make it make sense. The kicker is that there is no sense to it apart from what the listener subjectively brings to and imprints on it. It will be then that Lacrosse will realise itself fully. So, one of those rather abstract explanations of an album. It does explain at the end, one of my favourite things though, where the understanding and identity of an album is through the understanding that you as an individual listener bring to it, if that makes sense. Kind of an intro, a little kind of abstract but very interesting like this. But in terms of information, we know that Kate Finley is from New York, but not a lot else in terms of identity, except just getting a very apt description of the entire vibe this album is presenting to us, And especially, with its scrawled album cover, a figure holding the L of Lacrosse like a sporting stick. It is a very strange, cold vibe for the most part, that does feel isolating and chilling, but also human, A presentation of being, that's even at times oddly intimate, of course. And so, of course, really fascinating album in my books that just piqued my curiosity when I first discovered Venalism this year. And this was also actually the first album I started doing a write-up for when it came to looking at albums on this strange and unusual record label. So let's discuss the music then, shall we? So, opening up with Pinecone, our immediate scene is one of peculiar high-frequency whistles, the grinding of lowercase hums, and intermittent electronics floating in resonating spaces for brief moments. It's a peculiar tapestry, no doubt, and one that immediately places us into a rather cold landscape that is chilling to the bone. Like standing in the middle of nowhere, maybe, in the dead empty of the night, just feeling that cold just seep into your very body. And something about it just feels so empty, though, so vast and wide, and I like how this one introduces us to the entire landscape with these visions of rather cold, bleak, grayscale locations, presented to us in the form of abstract electronic performances that is, so isolatingly empty. And I genuinely feel like this one sends shivers down my spine as it slowly progresses. It's a very short opener, but it does perfectly pave the way for the entire scene. And so, we then move on to Aid, and a brief track again that opens up with a very peculiar percussive beat. And after the initial cold opening, this landscape feels starkly different, especially when this really weird electronic tone starts to come in, playing a very sort of faint melody at times. But there's a lot more sense of an urgency with this one, though, of rushing towards the end goal. But what I love, though, is that there's this very intermittent vocals speak with such a garbled effect that it barely sounds like words at all. But you get, with it, a sense of atmosphere permeating throughout their presence, adding to the sort of confusion and incomprehension that this whole track presents. And I should add, that electronic tone from the beginning, we should have been very wary, as Finley sends it into such weird directions across this entire track, turning it into such a deluge at times that it becomes all the more confusing and incomprehensible. It's amongst one of my favourite tracks off this album. I just love the very confusing little vibe that it presents. It's just one of those things. Moving swiftly on, though, we get the next track of Mandar. Now, this one I think is incredibly interesting, though, because you get a very intense percussive elements on this, a sort of like jungle music beat, I would describe it as, vocal chants that play intermittently amongst this lowercase drones and tones. So I think they're just saying, like, get up, something like that, maybe. And it kind of, to me, gives me that sort of like sporting vibe, the lacrosse thing, just that movement of sports, if that makes any sense. But once again, that vibe is very different. It's kind of starkly different to much of what we've heard before. But there's that wonderful intensity to it as well. There's something dark about the atmosphere, but it's fascinating as it pulls you into the strange soundscape and just turns it all up into weirdly enjoyable, chaotic levels. And I think, in a weird way, there's kind of like a party vibe to this one at times, kind of like, the more intense kind of songs by Aphex Twin, maybe, letting that intensity rise and fall into delusions of musical layers, and down into low-end drones. And it's a fascinating pull across the composition that really just fascinates me on this entire recording, though, especially when it all devolves into quieter moments, You still get many electronic elements, playing, around, sounding so skronky and so distorted. And towards the end, you do get a lovely vocal chant of sorts, as it guides the composition away from the rhythmic chaos into the quiet. It's a lovely way to sort of end the ferocious urgency that this track presented to us, and as I said, one of my favourites, I think. And so following that, we get the next track of Rumour, and this one just opens up with very, intense lowercase drones that rattle across the length of its notes, it feels, gently tapping away with a peculiar intensity, And there are some gentler, intermittent sounds playing almost random that occur throughout all the different channels on the headphones, creating a very peculiar moment of incomprehension that confuses you, I find, as it just occurs here, over here, and there. But that rattling pulse being established by that drone of sorts, it creates such a sense of tension that I feel like you just sort of get sucked into the sort of hypnotizing elements of it. And I have to say, it's at this point that I'm very aware of just how varied all the tracks have been, There's a lot of minimalist notions being explored in every single one, I feel. But as well, exploring different parts of electronica music as well, and into different facets of it, and all presenting different landscapes that all tie into that very skewed, cold environment, if that makes sense. Moving along again, we get the next track of Terminator, and this is a very loud track and a very confusing soundscape of electronics, and this one does have a kind of beat behind it all, as you get these whirling stretches of airy drones almost, perhaps just samples from Terminator the movie, just obscured into oblivion? Perhaps, I don't know. Probably not, right? But yeah, with this one, you kind of weirdly have that kind of club music element to it. Especially with that bassy beat in the background though. But it's all being constantly obscured by the various effects that seem to just take over entirely here. A peculiar little track that briefly rears its head for just a minute or so, but really adds to the sort of chaotic confusion of the entire album. From here, though, we get the next track of Aqueduct, the penultimate track on this album. And this one, once again, changes everything all up again. Like, we get, synths and keys and whatnot, and, some lovely looping drones that feel, oddly nice after the rather challenging aspects of the previous tracks, and this one really takes its time to develop, letting certain notes stretch themselves into peculiar shapes as you're presented, with a very nice little vibe. One that gets backed up by another looping beat in the background that, once again, gives me that sort of club music vibe, but offset by peculiar lowercase notions. And I think for us, it creates for this rather nice pulse to follow along to, though, one that is joined by percussion and rather basic tones from time to time. And for me, it once again has that sense of motion though. And out of all the tracks, I think this one has me most imagining, the album's title of Lacrosse, just people playing the sports and, it all becoming distorted and weird maybe. Perhaps anyway. But yeah, I do think this is a very cool little track indeed, and one that gives us time to perhaps properly recover after the rather arduous parts of the album's opening tracks. And I think with all the different elements it has, from the airy drones to the pulsing beats, it's perhaps one of the more lovely tracks on this whole album. And I do like how it sort of once again breaks everything up, still ties into it all, but sort of helps express more of that variation in style, if that makes sense. And so of course we get the album's final track of Prosthetic. And this one gives us opens up with another bed of ambient drones and tones that stretch out into the infinitesimal, it feels. And you get some lovely echoing effects occurring as electronic layers add into the scene, these peculiar swaths of colour that wash over everything, bringing moments of intensity as it swells with volume, like peculiar futuristic space-age sound effects playing all over, a beautiful sea of ambience. But I like the kind of futuristic aspect this one has, kind of making me imagine what sports would look like in the future, maybe? I don't know, a bit of a stretch. But it is a very dreamy track that really pulls you into this peculiar sound world though. And it's one that continues to change as certain elements become dominating factors, even introducing themselves as percussive elements, almost as you get the rising electronic drones and all the machinery being activated here, before just fading in and out amongst itself. And it's a lovely moment to have built up to on this entire album experience, one that feels, as accessible as the album's previous track, offering us a more relaxing end to the album than what the opening tracks were presenting, But of course, there is still challenging aspects of sorts, perhaps more so than the previous track, but I still like how the album navigates itself through that, from weird experimentation to peculiar ambience towards the end. I think it's really resulted in a wonderful ending to this entire album experience that's, as weird and experimental as everything we've been hearing so far. And so to summarise, I have to say, what an album. They're just one of my favourite albums of this year. It is a rather short album, don't get me wrong, but there's nothing wrong with short albums. Sometimes things that are short just tell us everything we need to know in just a very concise and direct way. And I think it's perhaps the charm of it though, it's managing to present to us, a very strange story in the form of electronic music that navigates many different aspects and branches of the genre as well. Combining lowercase sensibility with sort of techno vibes is something that just sounds really cool to me, and I just love the way Finley has achieved this on this particular album. And of course, different facets of electronic music, it kind of reminds me of sort of Richard Chartier meets Aphex Twin type thing here, very disparate parts of electronic genre just coming together in a harmonious way. Something very uniquely cool about that, I feel. And especially though, with the atmospheres that Finley has conjured up on these various compositions. It all navigates such strange and confusing worlds that, never really make all that much sense, of course, but that is perhaps the point of it. And to go back to what the Bandcamp was telling us, it is what we as listeners impart on it that forms the understanding of the album itself, And for me, it is a cold, isolating album that is oddly intimate at times, a very intimate expression of Finley themselves, it feels, you know, and what they, you know, think and feel, if that makes any sense. But it is, you know, wonderfully interesting, wonderfully varied, you know, and a rather confusing and challenging set of recordings that, you know, just takes you on a very wild ride. Definitely one of my favourite little albums that I've come across this year that just really captures the kind of things I enjoy in the plethora of genres that this album presents, combining it all in such an effortlessly cool way. Fantastic, I think. And so I think with that we will be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music, you know, and maybe a bit of a short one, but this was, you know, a rather short album, of course. But as mentioned, one of my favourite things that I've just happened upon, you know. And I just love the work Finley has put into this strange album, you know, with of course assistance from Andy Brown on finalising the audio, as mentioned in Bandcamp, it says, you know. It resulted in a rather fascinating and introspective work from Finley that does feel cold and isolating, but oddly warmly inviting at times. Very unusual, right? So yeah, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Music. Link to Lacrosse by Kate Finley in the description, of course. Go check that out, as well as checking out more things by Venalism. You know, go and have fun. I don't know whether this one or our video on Stave will be coming out first. We'll find out. We'll see which way the wind blows. But yeah, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. Wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.